The third one we saw is at the end of verse 14. His eyes like the flame of fire. He can truly see us wherever we are. He is the one who is watching. Now remember, there's two kinds of watching. I told you about the baby nursery and the glass there. There are the observers, and then there are the rescuers that actually go to the needy one and do something. And they don't just push their face against the glass and observe. They're actually there. And that's what Jesus does. And we saw that. His eyes of fire not only can penetrate through all the storms of our life, all the darkness, all the clouds, all the difficulty we're going through, and just the dust that goes around our lives, but he sees through where we are, but he doesn't stop there. He comes to us. And you know what's interesting, and I was referencing Jesus on our bell, that's Mark 6:46-48. But Jesus came, listen, save you $3,000, okay? Because this is the main lesson you learn in Israel, so you can just sit there for free and get it. Jesus always came to the disciples across their storms, across their problems. You know what we do? We avoid problems. We don't like conflict. We don't like difficulties. We don't like cancer. We don't like sickness. We don't like being unemployed. We don't like going through hard times with our children. But you know what? Jesus Christ meets us in our storms, in our weaknesses, in our being at the end of ourselves. Those are the best times. That's not just when he's closest. That's when we get to experience him. He couldn't get closer than he is. It's just we're aware of it when we're in trouble, when we're struggling. And so Jesus, those eyes of fire, remind us that he, and as long as you're in Hebrews, go back to chapter 4, the last verse of chapter 4. What does Jesus do now? Jesus, who always knows where his disciples were back then and what they needed, what does he do for us now? Do you remember the whole idea of this prophecy, lo, I'm with you always, is that we're looking at what Jesus did, then we see what he promised he would do in the book of Revelation, and when those two link up, we realize what he's doing what? Now. When? Now. In our lives. What is he doing now? It says in Hebrews 4, verse 16, let us therefore come boldly to the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of need. You see, Jesus doesn't push his grace on us. He lavishes it, he pours it out on us, but you know what? We have to receive, we have to accept, we have to invite and welcome and allow him to pour that out upon us in our time of need. He doesn't force himself on us. That's what's interesting. We're going to see a little bit later another one of these in Revelation 3 and verse 20 when Jesus is talking to the church in Laodicea and he says, I'm standing at the door and what? Knocking. Now, the famous painting that was painted of this, Holman Hunt painted the painting that's still in the British Art Gallery. It's one of the most beautiful paintings of the Bible. And it shows Jesus rapping against this door. That's all it is. He's got his head there and he's listening. And you can see him knocking on the door. And the curious thing about the picture is there's no what? There's no handle on the outside. He's wanting in. To bring us, look at verse 16, this mercy and grace to help in time of need. He's wanting to commune with us in our storm. He's waiting. And yes, sometimes we're totally oblivious to the need, and it's true that he does come to our rescue when we don't even need it. But I'm talking about in general, everyday life, Jesus is waiting for us to invite him in. To give us the wisdom we need, to give us the strength we need, to give us the insight, to give us the bigger picture so we aren't just down here in our little tempest in our teapot, so we see his larger program and cooperate with him. But he, through those eyes of fire, who knows every detail, every fear, every weakness, can help us. That's what Jesus wants to do. Well, what his need is, and I want you to go back to Mark 6. Mark chapter 6, verse 46, because I want to show you one more aspect of Jesus Christ in his risen and glorified perfection. Mark chapter 6. We're looking at the fourth element. If you're writing these down, we need to see Christ risen and glorified, omnipotence. Because when Jesus comes with this help, it's almost like some of the funny things that we experience in media. There are a lot of people that promise help. They say, oh, I'll give you this, and especially all the crazy ads you get, that if you do this on the internet, that it'll cure this or it'll cure that, or you'll triple or quadruple your money. They are all these empty promises that can never happen. But the fourth facet of Jesus Christ promising to be with us is that he is omnipotent. If he promises, he can do it. And that's what we see here when it says in Mark chapter 6 and verse 46, it says, he sent them away, they departed. 47, the evening came, the boat was in the middle. Verse 48, he saw them, that's his eyes, that's his omniscience. Now, at the middle of verse 48, now about the fourth watch of the night. You know what the fourth watch of the night is? The first watch went from 6 to 9. The second watch went from 9 to 12. The third watch went from 12 to 3. The fourth watch was at 3 a.m. It was still light out when Jesus sent them in the boat. It was probably 6. And Jesus let them paddle. First watch, 3 hours. He let them paddle, and worry. Second watch. He let them think they were sinking, and drowning. Third watch. Look down at verse 48. Now about the fourth watch of the night. Now we don't usually have patience for what God is doing. This past summer I was speaking at a Gull Lake in Michigan, and the kids found a butterfly that was starting to come out of its cocoon. It was a monarch, and it was beautiful, and you could see, it was straining, and it was pushing and doing whatever they do, and all of a sudden you could just see the glint of those white spots in that beautiful black and orange background of a monarch. And so I said, now children, let it go. It's supposed to do this itself. And so I went away and I was studying and working on my computer, and I came back and they said, it's done, look. And they brought this crumpled up, still wasn't unfurled monarch. And you know what? They had helped it out. And what they didn't know is that part of a butterfly having those beautiful extended wings is it has to labor, and push and do all the things it does. And that somehow extends its wings and makes them all come out. Because that little monarch it died. It was like a folded up parachute. It never did its thing. And you know what? If Jesus Christ, look at what's happening. He sent them away in verse 46, and he departed in the mountain to pray. And then evening came. He sent them off before dark, before the first watch. And then evening came. And he went up there and was on that mountain, and he was interceding for them, and he was watching them. Now, he never let that temptation be too great. He never let them despair completely of life. He never let them get to a point where, like Satan was trying to sift Peter, but Jesus said, I'm not going to let him. See, he knows our frame. He knows how much we can take. But Jesus knew this. Look what he says. He saw them, verse 48, straining at rowing. The wind was against them, but he waited until the what? Fourth watch. You know what that means? He let them go over 9 hours. Thinking they were sinking, thinking they were dying, thinking they would never make it, thinking they'd never see their families again. Why? I mean, how cruel could that be? Yeah, it's like how cruel it is for that monarch butterfly to have to struggle for a whole day to get out of its chrysalis or whatever you call that thing it was in. If someone tears it and cuts it and helps it, it ruins it. Jesus knows what we need, and he ever lives to intercede for us. But watch what happens after this intercession. In the fourth watch of the night, he came to them, look at this, walking on the sea. Now I love this. He didn't fly. He didn't drop down. I mean, wouldn't it have been neat, a big ray of light and shining on the storm-tossed sea, and he descended like this, and he came walking. Look what it says, walking on the sea. What was it that was giving them the problem? It wasn't the boat. It wasn't the night. It was the storm, the water, the sea. And Jesus walked with his feet across the sea, the storm, the problem, what it was that was going to drown them. He walked with his what? Feet. What element does John see of Jesus Christ? First he saw he was like the Son of Man. Then he saw this robe. And then the first thing as he's looking at him, he saw those eyes. And then, must be they were so awesome to him, he averted his gaze and he looked down and he sees his feet. And this is what it says. His feet were like fine brass, as if refined in a furnace. And those feet of brass, that's the fourth element we're looking at, speaks of strength and power. And Jesus reveals that strength to remind us He is omnipotent. And those feet of brass, of power, of omnipotence, walked across. In fact, I love I've read a lot of children's storybooks because I've had a lot of children's to read to. And I love one of the little storybooks we read that shows every time Jesus takes a step, the water gets calm. And he walked across that water going, poof, poof, poof. And he got up by the boat. You see, Jesus is omnipotent. His feet of brass. He came, Mark 6, verse 48, walking to them. But what's interesting was, and this is another lesson, he would have what? What does verse 48 say? He would have gone right by. But what did they do? They cried out to him. Jesus wants to be invited into our lives. Do you know what it says in James? And we won't turn there. We'll get totally lost tonight. It says, you have not because you what? Ask not. How many things in our life do we not even invite the Lord into? And how many things do we miserably fail in and look back and say, oh, I wish I hadn't made that terrible mistake. That was a terrible deal I got in. That was a terrible partnership. That was a terrible judgment. That was a terrible purchase. How often does he come to us across our storm and he walks right by? Because what? We don't cry out to him and say, help us. See, do you realize that's what every detail is in the Bible for a reason. He is showing us that they're in that storm and they needed to cry out to him. Maybe he waited for 9 hours just for them to get to the point where they would cry out to him instead of thinking they could do it themselves. I don't know. I don't want to add too much to this, but that is an interesting little detail. He was going to pass them by. In the lesson in Matthew 20 about the two blind men, it was told to them that Jesus of Nazareth was passing by. He wasn't there. He was just going by. And they were blind, and they didn't know how far away he was. They didn't know when he was coming. They just heard in the crowd that Jesus of Nazareth was on the Jericho road going up to Jerusalem. And so do you remember what Bartimaeus did? It says he screamed out at the top of his voice. He got up and he just started blindly walking because he didn't want to miss Jesus passing by. Right here in chapter 6 and verse 49, when they saw him walking in the sea, they supposed it was a ghost, and they cried out, for they all saw him, were troubled. But immediately he talked with them and said to them, be of good cheer, it's I. Don't be afraid. Jesus wanted to come to them across the storm, across their problem, and demonstrate his omnipotence.